The Hall of Thrones smelled of cold iron and old secrets. It was cavernous, ringed with stained glass windows that filtered the sunlight into blood-red patterns on the marble floor. Soldiers stood silent along the walls, more statues and men, as the king of Elgaris leaned forward on his obsidian throne. His gaze, sharp as a sword's edge, rested not on the kneeling emissary before him, but on the armored figure standing behind the dais, his black blade. She had a name once. Now, they called her Ashara the Unbroken. Ashara stood still, her black armor swallowing the light, matte and scarred from countless battles. The great sword on her back seemed to pulse with quiet fury, like it too had heard what the king was about to say. She had long stopped expecting mercy from him. What she feared now was a growing weight of her obedience. "The humans have grown bold," the king said, his voice smooth but cold. "They speak of freedom, of dignity." He spat the last word like poison. "It's time we remind them what they are." The emissary nodded, lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line. Ashara watched him with quiet disdain. He was one of the court's whisperers, always with a new plan, a new enemy to bleed. "Choose one," the king said, eyes finally locking with hers. "A voice among them. Break them in the arena, not just the body, the spirit. Humiliate them." Ashara did not blink. "And if they refuse to fight?" "They won't. They hunger for symbols, for heroes. We shall give them one. Then we shall take it away." She bowed, her silence accepted as consent. The court fell away behind her as she left, the great doors shutting like a tomb. In the corridor, her footsteps echoed louder than her thoughts. Yet a single doubt wormed its way through the cracks in her resolve. Why now? Why not simply crush the rebellion as before? Because fear was losing its grip. She walked toward the lower chambers, where the king's captives were held before their trials. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rusted chains. Torches sputtered along the stone walls, casting long shadows. When the guards opened the final cell door, she paused. Inside stood a man, barefoot, shirtless, hands chained but head high. His eyes met hers, calm and unflinching, like the silence before a storm. He didn't look like a warrior. His frame was lean, weathered. His hands bore calluses of labor, not war. And yet, something about him demanded attention. "You're the champion?" she asked. "No," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm the reminder." She tilted her head. "Reminder of what?" "That we were never broken, only buried." The chains clinked as he sat on the bench. His gaze didn't follow her armor or the sword. It stayed on her face, like he was measuring something deeper. It unsettled her in a way no enemy had. "You'll fight," she said, more command than question. He nodded. "Not for them. For what they've forgotten." Ashara turned without a word. She did not ask his name. The arena rose like a stone coliseum carved into the heart of the city. Its walls towered into the sky, ringed by layers of stands packed with citizens and nobles alike. Above them, banners of the crown rippled in the wind, a sea of crimson silk. The king's balcony loomed over the center, a black monolith from which judgment would be passed. Ashara entered the warrior's gate as drums thundered overhead. The air was thick with anticipation, the roar of the crowd a living beast. She stepped into the light, the heat of the sun baking against her armor, and raised her sword. The people chanted her name, a rhythm of fear and awe. Then the gate across from her opened. The man walked out alone, still bare-chested, still calm. No armor, no weapon. A hush rippled through the crowd. She advanced first, sword raised. He did not flinch, did not move. The first swing came fast, meant to end it. He ducked it, stepped back, and looked at her, not in fear, in sorrow. "You were once one of us," he said. She hesitated. Her blade hovered midair. "You still are," he added. She struck again, harder. This time he caught the blow on the chain still wrapped around his wrists, twisting as he rolled away. The crowd screamed, some in anger, others in shock. She chased him, blades flashing, movements precise, trained. He was not faster, not stronger, but he moved like water, elusive, unbreakable. Each time they clashed, he said something that chipped at her armor, not the metal, but the resolve behind it. Do you remember your mother's eyes? Do you remember the songs a human sang before the silence? Who gave you that sword? And who taught you to hate? She shouted and slammed him down, sword at his throat. The chains had snapped. He lay there, breathless, bloodied. He looked up at her, eyes burning. You were meant to protect, not destroy. Her grip faltered. The sword fell to the ground with a metallic clang. Silence. Then came the king's voice, sharp and furious, booming from a balcony. Finish it. Ashara looked up at him, then down at her own hands, trembling. The man stood slowly. The crowd held its breath. With one motion, he placed a hand on her shoulder, and the crowd erupted, not in fear, but in something new, something dangerous. Hope! Ashara stepped back, eyes wide, as if waking from a long dream. She walked from the arena without a word. Behind her, the king's fury twisted into something colder. Revenge. But she didn't look back. Not this time. The wind tore across the open sky above the arena, whipping dust and torn banners into the air as if the city itself had begun to tremble. Ashara stood alone in the training chambers beneath the arena, staring at her reflection in a broken shard of polished steel. The armor she wore felt heavier than ever, not from its weight, but from what it now represented. A lie, forged over years of silent obedience. The day of the rematch had come. The king had not spoken to her since she walked away from the fight, but his silence was not mercy. It was calculation. And now he'd made his move. The rebel would return to the arena, not in chains this time, but as a hero. The people demanded it, and the king, ever the tactician, had twisted their cry for justice into an opportunity. He summoned Ashara again, not to punish, but to command. You will fight him again, the steward had said, his words oily with false courtesy. Not for his defeat, but for your redemption. Redemption. She nearly laughed at the word. There would be no choice this time. If she refused, the sentence would not fall only upon her, but on the villages rumored to harbor rebellion, towns where humans whispered her name in hope, not fear. He knew. The king always knew how to shape change from guilt. The arena gates thundered open. Ashara stepped into the light, the roar of the crowd washing over her like a wave. But it was no longer unanimous. There were voices now conflicted, uncertain. Some still cheered, others watched in silence, and still others shouted the rebel's name. Across the sand, he stood waiting. No armor, no sword, just a length of wrapped cloth around his hands and a quiet conviction in his eyes that burned fiercer than steel. She approached slowly, sword unsheathed, its edge gleaming in the sun. Each step forward felt like a betrayal, not to him, but to herself. The part of her that had once believed in honor, in purpose, had died long ago beneath the king's orders. Or so she thought. You came back, she said, voice low. I never left, he replied. Only waited for you to see. She didn't respond. The signal came. An arrow loosed in the king's perch high above, and the duel began. Ashara lunged not with fury, but with precision, forcing him to move, to defend. Their bodies became rhythm and resistance. She struck high, low, spun and pivoted, testing him. He blocked with his forearms, countered with quick jabs meant to redirect, not wound. You're holding back, he said between breaths. She didn't deny it. You still fear him. I fear what I become. For a moment, their bodies paused, circling. Then stop being what he made you, he said, stepping forward, hands raised not in violence but in invitation. Choose something else. Her grip tightened. It's not that easy. No, it never is. Their clash resumed, faster now. The crowd roared again, stirred by the spectacle, but unaware of the war unfolding beneath the surface. Every blow was a question. Every dodge, a hesitation. He fought not to win, but to wake her. You were more than his blade once, he said as she drove him back. What happened to the girl who sang to the stars as she trained with a wooden sword? Her mind faltered. The memory stung. How do you know that? I know your mother. Her blade stopped inches from his chest. He stared at her, breathing hard, sweat and blood mingling on his skin. She lives. She survived what he did. And she never stopped believing you would too. The ground beneath her shifted. Not physically, but within. The last stone of her identity, long buried beneath duty, cracked. "You're lying," she whispered. "I'm not." He didn't move as she lowered her sword, slowly, as if waking from a long, painful dream. The crowd was murmuring now, restless. The king had risen from his throne. Ashara turned to look at him. His expression was carved from stone, but his eyes, those were burning, with fury, with fear. She felt something cold settle over her, but not from dread. It was clarity. Everything he'd built, his empire of submission, of control, rested on the lie that she, the king's blade, could never break. And here she stood, broken, unarmored in spirit, and free. She dropped her sword. It landed in the sand with a dull, final thud. Gasps echoed through the arena. The rebel moved to her side, steadying her. Above, the king raised his hand. Archers lined the upper wall, bows drawn. "Run," Ashara said. "I won't leave you. You have to. They'll kill us both." "They might, but you've already won." She looked at him, really looked, and saw no fear in his face. Only faith. The arrows flew. The crowd screamed. Ashara shoved him to the ground, her body shielding his. Pain flared along her side as an arrow found flesh. Darkness crept into the edges of her vision, but still, she remained upright, defiant. The people began to rise, not in panic, but in protest. Cries turned to chants, then roars. The name they shouted now was not the rebels. It was hers. Ashara, not the unbroken, but the freed. As the guards rushed to silence the crowd, the rebel pulled her into his arms, shielding her as the chaos grew. And for the first time since she had taken up the sword, Ashara felt weightless. Not because she had fallen, but because she had risen. The underground halls were a maze of firelight and hurried footsteps, echoing with the voices of those who had dared to rise. Ashara's breath was shallow as she leaned against the stone wall, the arrow wound burning with every heartbeat. The rebel, his name now known to her as Kale, kept pace beside her, his hand pressed firmly against her side to stem the bleeding. His expression was tight with urgency, but his movements remained careful, gentle. He treated her not as a weapon, not as a fallen knight, but as someone worth saving. They moved through an ancient corridor hidden beneath the arena, a place long sealed by the king's architects, now reopened by those who remembered what had been buried. Kale had spoken of the resistance's roots running through old Velgaris, deeper than even the king's cruelty could reach. It was here in forgotten veins of the city that rebellion found its breath again. Ashara stumbled, pain flaring, and Kale caught her before she fell. "Save your strength," he said, adjusting his grip. "I've marched half a continent with a broken leg before," she muttered. "That was when you fought for him," he replied. "This is different." She didn't argue. It was different. Every step now carried a weight she chose to bear, not one pressed upon her by orders. That difference was more exhausting than she had expected. Freedom, she realized, was heavier than chains. They reached a chamber carved into the rock, lit by hanging lanterns and filled with people. Some were warriors, others healers. All wore the same look of grim determination and desperate hope. The room fell silent as they entered. Ashara's face was known to all. Her armor, dark and jagged, made her silhouette unmistakable. But now, her presence carried confusion. Some reached for blades. Others froze, unsure whether bow or flee. "She's with us," Kale said loudly, placing himself between her and the crowd. A tense silence stretched, but no challenge came. A woman stepped forward, tall, wrapped in crimson shawls, her eyes shadowed by grief and fire. Ashara knew her before she spoke. She didn't know how. She just did. "My name is Elira," the woman said, her voice sharp and clear. "And I am her mother." Ashara's knees buckled. Elira caught her, arms strong despite the years, and held her close. No tears came. Not yet. But something cracked within Ashara, something she buried so deeply it had no name. She had been forged by the king's cruelty, sharpened against her will. But even steel remembers the fire that first shaped it. Elira laid her down on a low cot. Healers moved in quickly, cutting through layers of armor and bandages. Ashara barely noticed. Her eyes were locked with her mother's. "You should hate me," she whispered. "I never stopped loving you," Elijah replied, "even when they said you were lost." Ashara turned her face away. Kale stood at her side, arms folded, his gaze flicking between the two women. "She's not anymore," he said. The healing was slow, the pain stubborn. But over the next days, Ashara began to understand what she had never been allowed to see. The rebellion was not chaos. It was memory and meaning. It was farmers teaching their children to fight, poets etching resistance in diverse, and soldiers without rank guarding doors with nothing but conviction. She met them one by one. Those who had suffered, those who had fought, and those who had refused to be erased. Each carried a piece of a world the king had tried to crush. And she, once his sword, now stood among them. But peace was a brief luxury. Scouts returned with news. The king had sealed the city gates. Troops moved street by street, purging suspected sympathizers. The arena, once a symbol of fear, now stood as a scar. And Ashara's defiance had become a spark far more dangerous than any blade. The king wanted her returned, not for punishment, but for spectacle. "He'll turn your face into a warning," said Elijah, seated across a fire from her. "He won't just kill you. He'll rewrite you." "I won't be taken alive," Ashara replied. "That choice, at least, is mine." Kale stepped into the flickering light. "Or we could give him what he doesn't expect." She raised an eyebrow. "He expects fear," he said. "He expects you to run or die. What if you stand again in the heart of the city?" "You want me to walk into his jaws?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want you to show the people he can bleed." The plan took shape like iron cooled under water, sudden, clear, and dangerously simple. They would strike not with numbers, but with symbols. Ashara would return to the capital's upper square, the balcony where the king delivered his decrees. She would stand there, not as his black blade, but as proof that his power was not absolute. It was madness, and yet it felt like the only truth left. On the night of the march, Ashara stood in reclaimed armor, no longer blackened, but painted in the silver and red of her childhood village. She carried no sword, just a banner, stitched with the sigil of the old alliance the king had long destroyed. A tree, roots deep, branches wide. As they ascended toward the heart of the city, others joined. Silent, steady, a river of resistance clothed in rags and firelight. No battle cry rang out, only purpose. Ashara looked at Kale as they reached the final street, his jaw tight, eyes scanning every rooftop. "You're still not afraid," she said. "I am," he replied, "but I'm done running." She turned back toward the path ahead. The king would be waiting, and this time, so would the people. The city square was cloaked in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the tight-laced stillness that held its breath before a storm. Ashara stood at the foot of the royal dais, the spires of the citadel looming behind her like jagged teeth against the pre-dawn sky. The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke, scars of skirmishes already lost or won in the night. Above her, the balcony where the king delivered his decrees stood empty for now, but the eyes of his loyalists were surely watching from behind its veiled curtains. Ashara's hands gripped the banner tightly. Its weight was modest, but the meaning stitched into its cloth felt heavier than steel. The sigil of the old alliance, once the crest of unity between humans, elves, and free folk, had not flown in the capital for decades, not since the king shattered it and crowned himself god in all but name. Beside her, Kale surveyed the gathering below. Citizens began to spill into the square. Quiet at first, uncertain. There was no call to arms, no weapons in hand, just eyes, tired, angry, hopeful, watching, waiting. Some whispered her name. Others didn't speak at all. Still, they came. "You don't have to do this," Kale said, his voice low, meant only for her. Ashara didn't look at him. "Yes, I do." The doors of the citadel groaned open with calculated drama. A line of royal guards marched out, their armor polished a mirror brightness. Shields raised, spears angled forward. Behind them, dressed in crimson robes trimmed with gold, came the king. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. His crown was smaller than legend had claimed, but no less oppressive. a circle of sharp points that seemed designed more to wound than to adorn. He stopped at the edge of the dais, raised a single hand, and the guards halted. Ashara took a step forward. "Before your people," the king said, his voice smooth and echoing, "you seek to rewrite what has already been carved into stone. You stand here not as a savior, but as a traitor who has forgotten her place." Ashara's voice rose clear, unshaken. "I remember too well my place, at the end of your leash." A murmur ran through the crowd. The king's eyes narrowed. "You were raised above all others. Gifted purpose, protection, power. I made you—" "No," she said. "You broke me. But breaking something doesn't make it yours." He stepped closer, enough that only she could hear the venom in his next words. "They will not follow you. They fear freedom more than they fear me." She held his gaze. "Let's find out." She turned to face the crowd. The moment stretched impossibly thin. Behind her, the guards raised their weapons, preparing for the order. Ashara raised the banner high. At first, there was only silence. Then, slowly, someone stepped forward. A young girl, no older than 10, carrying a tattered cloth with the same sigil. Her parents tried to stop her, but she broke free, walking toward Ashara with trembling hands. Others followed. An old man on crutches. A merchant woman with soot-stained sleeves. A dozen, then 50. Then hundreds. The guards hesitated. The king shouted a command, but it was lost beneath the sound of rising voices, louder now, chanting not just her name, but something older. A song. One Ashara hadn't heard since she was a child, sung in the streets during spring festivals. Before the fear took root, she felt it before she saw it. Shifting power. The king's magic, once absolute, relied on silence, on control. And here was neither. He raised a hand again, this time in fury, to signal an assault. Ashara was faster. She stepped between him and the people, banner still held high, and shouted, "I was forged to serve a tyrant, but I reclaim my blade. If you strike us down now, you will not destroy rebellion. You will define it." The guards did not move. One by one, they lowered their spears. The king looked around, his expression unreadable. No power left in commands no one obeyed. No soldiers willing to bleed for a crown that had turned its gold to rust. He lunged forward, hand outstretched, dark energy swirling at his fingertips. Kale intercepted him before the spell could be cast. Their clash was brief, silent but brutal. Not magic versus might, but will versus withered domination. Kale struck first, disarming the king, forcing him to his knees. Ashara stepped to them, looking down not with vengeance, but clarity. "You told me once that fear was more powerful than hope," she said. "You were wrong. Fear ends. Hope endures." The king looked up at her, no longer furious, just small. He would not be executed. That was the choice they made together. To kill him would be to turn him into a martyr for the few who still worshiped the old power. Instead, he was stripped of title, of robes, of command, and exiled to the same shadows he had once forced others into. The citadel was open to the people, its gates flung wide. No throne remained, only a circle of voices that would govern with shared trust and accountability. Ashara did not stay to rule. Her work had been one of undoing, not rebuilding. She returned to the lands beyond the capital, traveling not as a warrior of legend, but as a guide for those seeking the path she had once lost. Kale remained at her side, not out of duty, but choice, a bond formed not in war, but in the promise of something better. As spring returned to Velgaris, the city began to bloom again. The banners waved from rooftops, not of conquest, but of remembrance, of the moment a single broken sword refused to cut deeper, and instead carve a new beginning. And so, the king's order to break a spirit became the seed of its uprising. What he shattered only gave the world a clearer view of what could never be truly broken.